Hi, everybody. This is Addison Shonland from AirInsight, and today is May the 25th, 2023. My guests are Catherine Creedy and Bernie Baldwin. I would refer to them as gurus of the regional airline space, and between the two of them, don't shake your head, Bernie. Over 50 years probably of industry experience. So if you want to hear something cool about the world's regional airline industry, this is probably where you're going to learn from these two people. Thank you for being with me. It's lovely to see you. We haven't seen each other for several years at any kind of industry event. So if you're ready, we can start off our conversation. So the first thing I want to talk about is, how do you see the regional market? Let's start off with the US and Canada, because that is physically the biggest one. Catherine,
well,
what do you think?
It's declining, and there are many reasons for the decline. The pilot shortage being the top one, but if you look at what the main lines are doing, they are replacing regional lift with A717s and A220s. Delta has made that very clear. United has done the same thing. We are seeing it all over the country. Basically, what has happened in the last 30 years is that the costs of regional airlines has gone up. We've narrowed the gap between the main lines and the regionals, so that the main lines are looking at that. I think somebody estimated it at $21 billion a year for CPA contracts, what main lines spend. And saying, that's too much money not to realize that there's some opportunity there to cut costs. Obviously, the pilot shortage is at fault for that, because we have rising pilot salaries. It's gone up, according to Oliver Wyman, 86% over the last 3 years. And so that's narrowed the cost gap between the two segments of the industry. And Delta is finding that it's just that they can profitably serve many of the regional routes with their 717s and A220s. And it's just a matter of time before we see more regionals fall out. And I would say we're looking at maybe 3 regionals that will be survivors, SkyWest, Republic, and maybe one other. But the whole trend is toward increasing the size of aircraft, because we don't have the pilots. So more passengers on fewer planes. But and in the US, they're scope limited. So any larger aircraft is not in the cards for US regional carriers, because the pilots won't allow it. And so you're seeing a rumbling beneath the surface of how they're going to get around that. And I've heard that perhaps carriers would take the regionals out of CPA contracts and put them back into the pro rates so that they could operate larger aircraft. But the bottom line of all of this is that regionals don't have a decade to wait for the pilot shortage to be over. So that's gonna determine the size and whether we even have regionals over the next decade, I think.
Wow. Bernie, although 70% of the world's regional airline flying is in the United States, the ripples from what goes on here in terms of scope clause and fleet decisions, those ripples run all over the world, even to the EU and to the UK, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think the interesting point that Catherine makes there about Delta and the like deciding to put aircraft such as the A220 onto the regional routes. Yes, it's a very, very flexible aeroplane. I mean, you look at Air Baltic in Europe, operating similar aircraft. Yes, you're going to have some shorter routes, but it also can go a long way. So the flexibility of that aircraft is what's giving the likes of Delta license to move into that market. But of course, there are some where they can't actually, like you mentioned, that you shift from CPA to prorate. But there are some where it's not going to happen so readily. And of course, that's opened the door for somebody like Breeze, who's going to have what are ostensibly a full fleet eventually, I would think, of A220s, which, again, we mentioned has the legs, but it also has economics that allow for shorter sectors. So that's going to be an interesting way in which the regionals develop. From my point of view, looking across the pond, in Europe, of course, we still have turboprops in a big way. You look at the probably the most active and growing airline in terms of a regional in Europe is Loganair out of Scotland. They're doing fine things. They've moved out of Scotland and moving into the UK. They're going into Heathrow now. Feeding into there, very active. But you still have, as I say, across Europe, companies like Widerøe in Norway. They still have a domestic market to feed that is it's a tough operating environment, and so they do need their turboprops. Now, obviously, they've had Bombardier, now de Havilland, Q series, Dash 8 series aircraft for a long time, and they're going to need to replace those. How that's going to happen, I think we'll get into a bit later. But I think there are still plenty of opportunities for turboprop operations across Europe. The other place I think that turboprops might still have a role to play is India. They've a lot of the airlines there work with, they either have a sub-fleet. I mean, look at Indigo, one of the most active and growing airlines there. I mean, right from its beginning, when it shocked everybody with an order for 100 A320s back in about 2005, it's never done things the simple way. But they've taken on. They've taken on a sub-fleet of ATRs, with turboprops. Other airlines in India have done the same. I can't see that stopping, because there are still some routes, some destinations which need to be reached, and at the moment, and for quite some time ahead, I don't think they're not going to be reached with anything much bigger. And I guess to a certain extent, down in South America, Azul in Brazil has shown the same thing, and they've got the full range, of course, down from the turboprops to go into the hinterlands of Brazil. They've got their narrow bodies, their E-jets zooming around all over the bigger cities, and then they've got some a smallish wide body fleet to take them up to North America. But I think there's quite a lot to be said for the turboprops in Europe for a while. The other place out in Australia and New Zealand, there's nothing much new gone in there. They've still got their old turboprops. Again, it's going to be a replacement market, I think. But again, like we'll discuss later, with what?
Right. So it's fascinating when you talk about India, because that's one of the items that I had to talk about here, and Brazil. It's interesting, before we sort of leave the EU or the European market, it's also probably good to mention that Helvetic has been very big user of the E2 successfully too, I might point out. So,
oh yes,
and Widerøe has been using the E2. So, but then again, Bernie, for posterity, I want to recognize that you did invent the term crossover jet, for which I will never forget, and I will cheer for you forever about it.
I cannot lay claim to it. I cannot lay claim to it. It would be very wrong of me.
Well, the first time I heard it when you used it, so I thought it was a brilliant idea. And Richard Apalafia said to me once that at 100 seats, he said that's no man's land. Below 100 seats, you can make these things work, make airplanes work commercially. over 100 seats you could make it, but somehow that no man's land around 100 seats has been so difficult. You know, you look at Fokker and Avro.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, going back to the 1990s, there was a clamour to find something that really was built to bring the right economics to, shall we say, 90 to 120 seats. And then suddenly there were three.
Right.
You had Bombardier. You had Bombardier with its CRJ 900 and CRJ 1000. You had Fairchild Dornier with the 728 and 928, and of course Embraer came along with the E-jets, and then it ended up with four models actually going between 70 seats and 120 seats. So that was a very interesting time. I do remember it well.
Right.
So,
that's why I said at the start of this call, between the two of you, you've covered just about this, you know, half a century of this industry. So there's nothing you haven't seen. Anyway, so I'm very intrigued by, obviously in India, the need for turboprops, I think, is absolutely, as you say, let's not say turboprop necessarily, but a regional, an economically effective regional air service, whatever tool they manage to use. Yes, turboprops work. Interestingly, I hope I still have this right, that the same fuel in a turbine engine jet is charged a taxation that a turbine fuel in a turbine with a propeller is not charged. So turboprops and other jets pay different fuel price, but it's the same fuel. That's Indian peculiarity I've been told about. Also, another statistic that I once read in The Economist, which was fascinating: more people travel by train in India in one day than travel by air in a year.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? Now, of course, that's some years ago. So maybe that ratio has changed. It might be like, you know, more people travel in 2 days than in a year. But still, the numbers are staggering. And of course, as we move, every economy is moving increasingly towards needing to connect all the dots in its economy where people live.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you would think it's interesting, Catherine, what you're saying about in the US example of regionals dying. That's an odd thing. And by the way, if you're going to talk about the 220-100 like Delta's using and the 717, the 717 economics are upside down right now. No matter, I don't know how they're going to make that work, because it's old, its fuel burn is not good. The 220-100, you guys probably have noticed, hardly anybody buys that model. Everybody buys a 300.
Mm-hmm.
So you can use the 100, but you can only cherry pick up to a certain level.
Yeah.
And anything below that level just loses air service.
Yes, and that's what's been happening. I mean, the Regional Airline Association talked about 500 jets grounded because of the lack of pilots. Well, how many of those jets are 50 passengers and are never going to come back to the fleet? So that's kind of a dramatic statistic, but if you drill down, it's not as dramatic as they would have you believe, because how many of those are larger jets? And first of all, in America, the turboprop has gone away, which is sad. I mean, it was the dumbest thing the mainlines ever did is to refleet. But here we had regional jet manufacturers wanting to sell that in favor of instead of the turboprops, and the mainlines wanting to, get rid of the turboprop, and because they didn't want to invest in educating the public on the new generation turboprop. So that's it. Turboprop is a complete non-starter here in the United States when you talk about talking to mainline airlines. And I think that we're seeing mainlines do some interesting things, such as the taking out, the seats from a regional jet to make the CRJ 550 by United. And ALPA really hates that idea, as they hate the idea of SkyWest doing their charter and JSX. It's like, I don't understand their reasoning of why they're going after these things. And thank you very much, but NBAA is going to come in and dump all over them. because it's a charter, so at any rate, the things that airlines are trying to diversify and to survive are meeting with this political problem created by ALPA, and ALPA's been very successful. Let's admit that right up front. They hated the regionals since the 1980s. They did everything they could to question its safety when it was spurious comments and statistics. Their entire idea was to get rid of the regionals because they were taking mainline jobs. And part of that was to increase the cost of doing business. And they've been very successful with the single level of safety and the pilot shortage. They've increased the cost of regional airlines now so that they are not much different than the main lines. And the main lines are getting very, very creative in that. So I see a ton of opportunity in the United States for small aircraft operations, but I'm very worried about the fact that we have this single level of safety, which kind of tossed out the tried and true methodology of regulation that said the regulation has to fit the operation, and said, well, we have the single level of safety, so you can't do what you want to do economically, and so and that's really what ALPA is going after with the charter services, and even NTSB is making noises about the single level of safety in the business aviation industry. So and that just turns upside down the economics of regional airlines and charter and all these public charter and all the things that the airlines are trying to do very creatively to maintain air service.
The thing that I always find so fascinating about this industry is that if ever somebody comes up with an idea that's novel, that's creative, that can move things, the powers that be that are in that industry, the silos that are built out over time, will turn anything that is perceived as a threat. They'll throw that word safety.
Yes. They
will question its safety as if the silo is perfect safety. It's not.
Yeah,
it's right. Not. I think the FAA statistic is 80% of all crashes are pilot error. Hello. And what's interesting, I used this example the other day talking to somebody at a news service, that remember bank clerks, how they were replaced by ATMs? We already see the power of drones. And you can fly a drone from a container in Las Vegas over Afghanistan in combat. Now, I would suggest to you, we're not talking safety here, but operational efficiency and effectiveness. If you can do that, it's not a long jump from there to, can you fly a freighter remotely?
The regional airlines, the regional cargo carriers are already buying unmanned freighters. So Ameriflight has bought Saberwing and Nautilus, and then they're also working with Reliable Robotics on its unmanned systems, so to retrofit current aircraft. So it's happening, and you're going to see that it's going to be proven out in the regional cargo field. You're going to see that it's going to be proven out in the advanced air mobility field over the next couple of decades. And, as far as single pilot or no pilots is concerned, we're nowhere near that. I mean, even Ed Bastian from Delta said he doesn't see it coming anytime soon. And I would agree with him. And I don't see it coming much before 2040, 2045. But it'll have to be proven out in other arenas besides the commercial passenger arena.
we've gone right into my next two items here very effectively. What I would like to do is come back to what Bernie was saying earlier on, what comes next. So I think, I don't know, I'm hoping you'll agree with this idea that in terms of regional, globally, it took off when there was a 50-seater jet. That's when it really started happening. And the 50-seater jet economics is upside down, but the 50-seater is still a viable airplane size. That number works to serve smaller communities, plug that into a hub, move the traffic. Now, what is fascinating, and I'm going to use an example here, Bernie, forgive me for being North American centric. Take Southwest. They want the MAX 7. They can't get it because it's not certified. And they keep, by the way, they're taking a new MAX 8 every 3 days this year. I mean, think about the digestion of that. A new airplane every 3 days. It's mind-blowing. But now I digress. You look at a company like Southwest, they obviously are the masters of serving small communities as well. And they're not a regional. What would happen if you have a company like Southwest saying, how about all these regionals that are pulling out of these markets, but we could maybe benefit, and Breeze, by the way, is another one like Bernie mentioned, that might look at this. Why not bring in a 50-seater, 40-seater turboprop that are quiet? If you've flown the latest ATR, or if you flew the Dash 8 with its noise cancellation, that airplane is quiet. Even the ATR 72 without noise cancellation, because of what they do to ameliorate noise, it's a very quiet, nice ride. And to worry about propellers, well, it's just not something to worry about. You can move pretty well, right? Bernie, go ahead.
For me, the idea of using turboprops to meet the smaller communities it should be a no-brainer. I mean, they obviously the ATR 42 600 latest version is going to have its new engine on, the XT from Pratt & Whitney Canada. Quieter engine, quieter inside, comfortable inside, a wider body feel to me on the ATR than on the Dash 8. That's just a personal visual sort of feeling that I get when I'm in one or both, or in either of those two turboprops. But certainly, the problem was, of course, that there was a huge outcry after the Roselone accident, and saying that all turboprops were dangerous, which of course they weren't. And that came from, I believe she was the leader of the NTSB at the time.
Actually, it came from ALPA. That was another ALPA attack. And
yeah, but wasn't Mary Schiavo, the lady called Mary Schiavo, involved as well?
But she was not with NTSB. She was with the DOT, Inspector General's office or something like that. But that reflected the fact that she drank the ALPA Kool-Aid.
Oh, I see. Okay. But I do remember that name. But anyway, yes, going back to the 50-seat, why not? I mean, there's an awful lot of people in the US who've got the disposable income to want to travel, even around their own country. I mean, I'm not going to go down the Americans going out of America, because we're not talking those sort of sectors. But you've got such a magical country that's one big country all together there, and exploring that using aviation for speed, and taking long weekends away. Well, you've got the capacity with the low fare airlines, the Southwest, the JetBlues across the US. Why not get to some smaller destinations as well? And the turboprops, run properly, can provide it at a reasonable price. It's not going to be the cheapest price, but it will be reasonable, and that's got to be a bonus for the traveling public.
It is, but the problem with that is you're running up against the same barriers that the RJs are running up, or the airlines who are running RJs, is the pilot shortage. And so that kind of skews the economics of any small community air service, no matter who's flying it, whether it's regional or mainline, Southwest, as you suggested, Addison. So, you know, yes, there is tremendous opportunity in the United States for intra-regional airline service. By that, I mean New England, Upper Midwest, Florida, Texas, California, where big states, and there's in order to go anywhere in Florida, you have to go to Atlanta or you have to go to Charlotte. So why, you know, what? So yes, there's tremendous opportunity there, but you're going up against, again, the pilot shortage. And, you know, we're looking at, one of your questions, Addison, is the sub 50 seater the core tool of this segment? And I think it is. And we have some really great aircraft coming along. Cessna just delivered its first passenger Sky Courier. Tecnam has the P-2012. And so we have these aircraft out there, but the regulatory structure is very expensive, the single level of safety. So you're going to have to change that. And that's going to be a hard pull because FAA just doesn't have the bandwidth for anything these days, much less something as innovative as that. And there are CEOs who have identified this I've been talking to them for like 15 years, have identified the loss of community air service as one of the biggest opportunities out there. And it wouldn't be hub and spoke, it would be the old time connecting communities of interest instead of hub and spoke. So XYZ widget company in Dodge City, Kansas, where do they sell to, and where do they need to go? And sometimes it may not be through St. Louis in order to get to the next one. So it might be a point to point. It might be linear, which really takes us back 40 years. But again, the problem is the regulatory structure and financing. All of the financing is being sucked away by the advanced air mobility. So, and that's not going to be a regional service. That's going to be city center to airport, and because that's what the airlines have described. I mean, Alaska said that they want to replace the RJ with a Dash 8 on hydrogen, but those technologies are at least a decade out. So, you know, I just don't see it happening, but there is a ton of opportunity if we could get over the regulatory structure and find the financing.
I wanted to share something with you. We had a briefing recently with Deutsche Aerospace and their forthcoming D328 Eco. And it was a fascinating presentation because firstly, it's the same engine, Bernie, that you mentioned on the ATR, you know, the state-of-the-art Pratt Canada turboprop. So it's going to be all the green stuff you could probably, as the name of the airplane signifies, they focused on eco. And it's a 40-seater, and they've got all the right bells and whistles in technology and materials. It's a very interesting program. But they told us something fascinating in the presentation. They said, and we're going to start off with the Pratt engine, and depending how technology evolves, if you want to go to hydrogen, we can do that. If you want to go to battery, we can do that. We're agnostic in terms of power solutions. So that was fascinating to me. And I thought we just should mention that particular program, because it is also, like you mentioned, Catherine, the Tecnam and the other programs that are evolving. It is going to be, and it kind of leads us into the next issue here, going forward, batteries, hydrogen, all the new power modes are going to be seen in this segment first.
Mm-hmm.
You know, aviation, for example, Heart has gone from 19 seats to 30 seats because they've recognized, forget about 19 seats, who's going to buy it? Mm-hmm. And the rumble in the jungle we hear is that the 9-seater aviation is probably also going to be expanded to a bigger airplane, because guess what? Bigger makes sense in economics in this industry. That's just how it works. Scale is real. So the idea that I think we coalesce on the idea that if the sub 50 seater market is a good thing. The problem we have here, of course, is this sounds like going to sound like an anti-Alpa moment here, but it seems to me that there are structural challenges from the vested interests within the industry not to see change, not to see an evolution, unless that evolution can be managed and controlled by said vested interest. Is that a fair reflection?
Yes,
I've heard you guys say.
What do you think, Bernie?
I observing from a distance, yes, it does appear that way. I mean, nobody's against the idea of keeping safety at the highest level. Absolutely nobody in the industry. I've never met one person mention anything but that. But there has to be some flexibility in terms of getting people on board. I mean, one of the other sort of buzz phrases is, there's nothing like experience. Well, where do you get your experience? You're not going to get it by flying in a Cessna for in big blue skies over Arizona or something like that. You need to be in there at a reasonable time, so with somebody experienced alongside you. People seem to manage that in Europe, so I don't see why it can't be the same in the States.
Well, what's interesting is that there is now a shift. House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee Aviation Subcommittee Chair Sam Graves has now taken up the cudgels against ALPA and said airlines flying into the United States have 250-hour pilots and they do fine. And nobody around the world adopted the 1,500-hour rule, and their safety is fine. I don't believe I don't believe drilling holes in the sky makes for a good airline pilot. So
that's a Jonathan Ornstein phrase as well.
And exactly. Rick Leach also said that.
So I think that the shift is coming two ways. One, the loss of community air service is being felt by legislators because Rally for Air Service, which is kind of an industry-backed thing, but it's made up of mayors and state legislators and chambers of commerce and who are losing air service, and they're attacking all of these old ALPA myths and saying this is ridiculous. We need our air service. And I know. View from the Wing, Gary Leff said the number of airlines in the U.S. has shrunk markedly, declining over 70% during the past 30 years as a result of mergers and bankruptcies. While the largest airlines today have significantly more reach than they did 20 years ago, the U.S. air travel U.S. air travel has grown overall in the past 2 decades. Small cities aren't served by nonstop flights at nearly the same extent as they used to be. The share of airline trips under 500 miles has fallen in half to just 14%, representing a loss of 30 million travelers. What's more, many small cities have lost commercial service altogether. That's what's driving this shift on Capitol Hill. And Capitol Hill is now beginning to listen to the Rally for Air Service and to airlines and say, perhaps we haven't been very smart about this whole safety 1,500-hour rules. Now, ALPA's response to that was to get 19 other unions and file with the DOT against SkyWest Charter on single level of safety and all that kind of stuff. So clearly ALPA is feeling the heat and is now playing the union card against the Democrats like Tammy Duckworth and Chuck Schumer. But Chuck Schumer was very enthusiastic in his letter to the DOT, favoring Part 135 service by Contour Airlines. It's almost the same service that SkyWest wants to provide.
Yeah.
So there's a shift, and so we can hope for the future, but I don't think it's, even if we didn't have the 1,500-hour rule, we're talking about safety here. We need a complete pilot training reform, and that's not me talking. That's aviation safety professionals, aviation training professionals who speak at World Airline Training Summit and at the Royal Aeronautical Society. They have a blueprint already. All we have to do is adopt it. And the blueprint is really what Europe does today.
Well, I mean, surely, well, for a start, we don't seem to hear anything like the same union complaints about people with certain amounts of hours in Europe. You just don't. It's a lot. I'm sure people are wary of it, but you know, I think there's a sort of common sense. We'll get them into the, we'll introduce them into service in a gradual manner, and get some hours up, and keep them doing some training at the same time, balancing the workload, and look at other parts of the world with you know, the MPL training. I know a lot of people are really against it, but so far, as far as I'm aware, there's not been much go wrong in terms of any incidents that you could actually put back to not having enough hours and also having MPL training. It's just not there. You know,
precisely.
Airlines like Emirates use it, so far as I'm aware, and out further out in Asia, AirAsia itself, I'm fairly sure they use it. They've got a ton of aircraft out there flying under the AirAsia banner. Nothing happened.
I was attending Watts, and one of the speakers, an airline training professional, I can't remember who he was from, but one of the speakers said the only reason ALPA opposes MPL is because it wasn't invented here. And, you know, so it's like, okay, let's learn from the rest of the world. The other shift that I'm seeing from training professionals is that they want to see a shift to training an airline pilot from the beginning.
Yeah.
Instead of all this nonsense of training every other kind of pilot, and then as an afterthought, oh, we're going to get an ATP and then we're going to build at that, 1,200 hours. So we need to have the professional airline training that's required and is done in Europe and elsewhere around the world easily. The blueprint is there. All we have to do is adopt it.
That's it. If you want to be an airline pilot, let's train you from the off to be an airline pilot. If you want to have your personal flying as well, that's up to you. But if you're going to come here to be an airline pilot, let's train you as one. That's a common sense approach to it, because it costs an awful lot of money. And not everybody has that money to actually do the private stuff first. Just get into the training program and help. And I'm sure the airlines themselves, wanting people to be airline pilots, tailor it from the beginning that way, right through to being in the right hand seat and then moving on to the left hand seat. It just seems straightforward. But as Addison says, it's one of the challenges, and yourself, it's one of the great challenges. I think the other thing is we've also got the challenge of reaching out and having it far less of a male-dominated pilot grouping. I was going to say fraternity; it's the wrong word. But a far less male pilot community. That's another thing. It's a great industry to be in. It's a great. These are great jobs, and the for all, I mean, it never was, unless you were going back, flying Spitfires and things like that. Flying commercial airplanes for a long time has not been anything to do with brute strength or anything like that. So that blows that out of the window, and we know that we've just got to reach better into girls' schools and just get them interested and get them coming on board, because we've got to break that. We've got to break out from being less than 20%, and even there's only a few that are reaching 20%. We've really got to build that up. It's got to be become a little bit more equal across the numbers.
And regardless of what discipline you're talking about in aviation, or really in any industry, if we don't go beyond the traditional pipelines, we will never meet the workforce challenges we have today. So we have to do that as a matter of survival.
Yeah, because there's so many competing careers out there.
Right, absolutely. And we're just one among dozens of careers that they could choose from. Aviation maintenance technicians, they face a barrier of, they have to take a test, and the test is expensive. And instead of taking the test, they'll go work for Disney World, because that's the type of skills Disney World also wants. So it's ridiculous that we don't change these barriers. Addison, one of the things that you were talking about hydrogen and batteries, one of the things I wanted to point out there is, I'm getting a little sick of all this, hydrogen and batteries are going to save the planet because it'll reduce our carbon emissions. I don't think so, because, well, yes, you have to choose your poison. Do you want fossil fuels, or do you want to destroy the planet by mining copper and all these other things, lithium and all these other things that are needed to go into batteries? And mining, there's a new huge mining operation in Indonesia who said, we'll just toss all the runoff into the ocean, into some of the most pristine areas of the world. So my feeling on this is that unless we talk about the entire supply chain as contributing to the environmental solution, we're going to ignore a lot of things and just make the same mistakes as the past.
It's a very good point. I don't know if well, you might know this. I wrote something recently on the US airline pilots being on the wrong side of history. And I mentioned the 1,500 hours, and I mentioned the scope clause. And then I came up with another wrinkle, was because of those work rules, what is left of the regional airline industry has to fly old planes that are not ecologically efficient. Mm-hmm. So now you've got not only the economics of the thing, and as you mentioned very well there about communities trying to rebuild air service, now becoming a political hot potato because of the economic hot potato. By the way, it's also ecologically not a good thing. Mm-hmm. So we can just call it the elephant in the room. This structure called vested interest the pilot vested interest. They're going to get chipped away. Mm-hmm. They're just going to get chipped away. So here's the thing. We've been going for nearly an hour, which is fabulous. I mean, this is a great conversation. So I'm going to ask the two of you, 5 years out, what do you see? Bernie, you go.
I think we will still be pushing the regular turboprops. I think ATR will come up with something by then. They won't have brought it to market, but they'll be moving into something different. I don't know with what power they'll be doing it. Obviously, a bit lower, of course, you've got Heart. They will have started delivering in 5 years' time. At 30 seats, who's to say where how many they'll be being asked, how the demand will be. There's places that have invested already in Heart. Let me just look here. I just remind myself, in Heart you have Air New Zealand looking at its next next mission next gen aircraft partnership to replace all the Q300s and things like that. In the US, you've got United and Mesa.
Alaska.
And Alaska is going into the that's working with Zero Avia.
Yeah.
On the more regional aircraft. And then there's this brand new one coming out of Europe called Maeve Aerospace, M-A-E-V-E, Maeve Aerospace, looking to bring a 44 passenger all electric regional airliner to market by 2029 that'll operate up to 250 nautical miles. So I wish them well with it. I think one of the things that I think you alluded, you mentioned this, Catherine. We shouldn't go down the rabbit hole of all these Embraers Eve and all these urban air things. The real things we're looking at are Heart, maybe this Maeve, Zero Avia. There's been one or two others saying they've done that, but a lot's gone quiet of late. There was one, is it Faradair in the UK was looking at one. I remember the structure of it, but that seems to have gone quiet at the moment. I think the regionals will still be operate. Some of the regionals in the US will still be operating CRJs and ERJs even then in 5 years' time. Around the rest of the world, those aircraft, if they've got low hours on them, they're making some inroads in Africa. They're doing it in I think they'll do it a little bit in India as well, and some of the Asian countries. But I think more and more you're going to get the bigger regional, shall we say. I mean, you've only got to look this week at Scoot, the low fare airline subsidiary partner in the Singapore Airlines group, going for some Embraer E2s to partner their bigger aircraft. I think that there's opportunities there. I don't know enough about South America beyond Brazil and their air transport system to think how it's going to develop down there. But you would think that with the right will, and it has to be political and monetary as well, that there would be opportunities there for some of these aircraft like the Zero Avia powered Dash 8 or Dash series, and for the Heart series. And also I think with the aircraft you mentioned, the 328 Eco, with that having, like you say, this power agnostic design, that's going to be very useful as well. Why not buy some of those, particularly if you can replace the power plant in 10 years' time? Power plants can even be sold on, by the sound of things, if pass them on to an ATR operator or whatever. See, I think there's a lot to be seen coming forward. I'm getting words mixed up a bit here, but I just think it's going to be quite exciting. I think Heart at the moment is where I would look to see an aircraft that might break some barriers in all parts of the world.
Catherine?
Well, I don't see any new aircraft on the horizon for the regionals for the next 5 years. I just don't see them investing in that. Mesa has, but Mesa is a different kind of an animal. It kind of strikes me as throwing spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. It's tried to diversify so much in the past and has not been successful in China or anywhere else. And then recently it said it was going to invest in a regional service in Europe, and I think they just pulled back on that. And I'm sitting there going, okay, so I think you'll see SkyWest and Republic certainly as survivors, I think you'll also see the incorporation of all the wholly owned regionals into their main lines. Several people have said that's something to watch. I don't know, I haven't seen it myself, but getting rid of all those certificates has got to be a cost saving at the very least.
Bringing sort of Delta, bringing in Endeavour, and American bringing in Envoy and Envoy and such like,
and Piedmont and PSA, and so I see them being folded into the main line, and the main line offering everything from an RJ all the way up. The future aircraft, I don't see anything coming in within the next 5 years. I think regionals are going to continue to struggle on costs and on workforce for at least 10 years. And that's why I say, I wonder if they can survive 10 years with all of these headwinds. And we have a lot of other headwinds, but there is, I want to end on a positive note. There is a ton, as I said, of opportunity that airline presidents are actually looking at and exploring, but we need a regulatory change in order to do that, and that's going to be a huge headwind. But if that could happen, we could see the resurgence, another evolution of the regional carrier that would probably be as big as the last evolution back in the 1970s and 80s.
Wow.
Because there's that much opportunity out there.
Well, I just ask Catherine a question there. I mean, do you see you've got one or two smaller regionals that are not unaffiliated at the moment? Do you see any likelihood that that somebody like Silver, I mean Silver Airways down in Florida, but they're unaffiliated? So do you see any opportunity, any possibility that people might pop up again and create a new set of those, that then the majors have to go after them again if they want connectivity to the smaller communities?
Yeah, yes, I do. That's the opportunity I'm talking about. They'll start with the intra-regional services because that's where the opportunity is right now, but it will evolve just as it did the last time into, those people are carrying a lot of passengers and we should, but then it would change it again from serving the community to serving the airline in their hub and spoke. And we've got much smaller networks for the mainline carriers now. Smaller networks means fewer regional, less need for regional lift. So all of those things are roiling beneath the surface. And I think that for the regionals right now, they're concentrating on CPAs. I'd like to see them start to think in terms of outside of the CPAs, like SkyWest is doing, and actually providing service to communities rather than service to the airline.
I think we should wrap it up. We've been going for an hour.
That was a great line to finish, though.
Exactly.
Catherine.
Exactly. This is the longest call I've ever done like this. Thank you so much for putting 50 years into 1 hour, the two of you. Very good. Thanks so much.